All right. Well, welcome everyone. I am on beautiful Cape Cod, Massachusetts today, visiting my 84-year-old father. And he's alone after 50 years of marriage to my mother, Madeline, who passed away last June, 2021. And my mom was an incredible lady. She raised four boys. She took in all sorts of people. We met so many people at her funeral that I either didn't know or maybe had forgotten over time. People that she fed, people that she gave a warm bed to, people that she was there to almost as a second mom when their mom couldn't be there for them. And I'm working in a co-working space that I discovered last June when I was home for a few weeks, and I was really hesitant to do this masterclass outside of my studio that I've built in these past couple of years, doing virtual work with really nice lighting and a nice camera and all of that. And I was hesitant to do this because of that. But then I thought, well, wait a second. The whole premise of this book is bringing more humanity back into the workplace. And so today you get the whole version of Sal. You get the Sal who's super excited about the book launch and the success that has brought, and also the Sal that's a little bit sad that when I go home today and hang out with my dad, my mom's not going to be there. So welcome to the Deeply Human Workplace. So a little bit of context that we all know about. The last several years have been they've been interesting, to say the least. We've dealt with so much as a human race, if you will. We've dealt with COVID. We've found ourselves working remotely, many of us taking care of elderly people at home or kids who are also at home while we're working remotely, or being homeschooled. We've seen an incredibly politically divided environment where maybe to an extent people don't even talk to each other or try to understand each other. More recently, we're watching some sad images and disturbing experiences unfold in the geopolitical world with Ukraine and areas around it, where we're seeing computer scientists and human resources people and people of all walks of life take up arms to defend themselves and their homeland. And locally, we also have our challenges. My hometown of Louisville, Colorado, that some of you may have heard about, we lost over 500 homes in a fire on December 30th and December 31st of 2021. And when combined with the local town next to us, Superior, Colorado, it's close to 1,000 homes. And at work, we're dealing with supply chain issues and unprecedented levels of attrition as employees kind of find their way and their perspectives have changed about work. So I have a question for you. With all of the things that are going on in our world, what are some of the words that might describe how you feel today? And since we have a small group, take a moment to type how you might feel or what you might be experiencing in your experience of the world in the chat box. What stands out to you today with all that's going on? Yeah, Johnny, that's really interesting. Mix of guilt, appreciation, excitement. It's like it's a blend, really. As I think about our experience with the fires in Colorado, it is very much all of that. My family was extremely lucky in the sense that our home and our neighborhood was untouched. But half mile down the street, there's 200 homes that are just gone, just quite literally missing. And so there's some survivor's guilt. There's a little bit of how we got through it and others didn't. But there's also, for me, great appreciation for that, great gratitude that we still have a home. but also excitement about the future. I just see so much opportunity. And Lindsay, you mentioned being on a sprint, but hopeful. Yeah, it's kind of like there's almost this dichotomy, this paradox of these different emotions that I think so many people are experiencing. Heidi, you mentioned definitely excited in the micro level in both your personal and work environments. Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that, because I think the thing for us to also think about is how can we control that micro environment, the things that are more in our control. And if I asked you a few other questions for you to reflect on, imagine a workplace where you had meaningful relationships with people at work, or a place where you felt safe to take risks, to take interpersonal and social risks, to share different ideas and maybe different ways of doing things. And imagine if you had clarity, you knew how to succeed, and imagine that you were in a workplace where you could grow and evolve and be challenged as a human being and really feel a deep sense of purpose at work. And Heidi, I think it stands to your point, like these are things that we can control. And I believe that these are places where we can make a difference in our world. One person, one leader, one team, frankly, one workplace at a time. And we might not be able to impact what Mother Nature does. We might not be able to impact the scope or the dynamics of the geopolitical world, but we can impact our workplaces. And today, I think, is a conversation on how to do that. And I think with the added complexity, I think with the accelerating pace of change, one way in which we can do that is to bring humanity back into our work. And if there's been one characteristic that has defined the human race, that has allowed us to survive through so much over such a long period of time, it's our adaptability. And as that in complexity and pace of change continues to escalate and elevate, it's that adaptability and the very deeply human characteristics that we have that will enable us to survive and to thrive in the future world. So today, as we think about the workplace of the future, as we think about what we can control, today's a conversation. Today's a conversation to explore human needs, to understand what drives people at work so that we can ultimately tap into what people need so that we can create a healthier team environment, a healthier culture in the places that we work, and maybe have some practical tools that enable us to bring our whole selves to work and enable other people to bring their whole selves to work so that we can ultimately ignite the potential of people and the people that are around them. So that's ultimately what we're here to explore today. Thank you for being here. And thank you for picking up a copy of The Deeply Human Workplace. The model itself that's inside the book is something that I started to create before COVID. And it's been a labor of love for a while, as any project like this is. But I think more important than ever is the desire, the need that people have to be able to bring their whole selves into the workplace and to bring that humanity back to work. So today's session is designed to spark a discussion, and I'm so thrilled that you can join us. Here's the foundational question that I think we should be asking during this session today. How can we all make a bigger impact on our world by creating a more deeply human workplace? So when psychologist Abraham Maslow first introduced the concept of hierarchy of needs in 1943, it fundamentally changed how we thought about human needs and how we appreciated human motivation in the workplace. And in short, once you square away, the shelter, the food, the water, and you've got some safety and security, we can start moving up this ladder of needs where we can start to meet our needs around self-actualization, finding space for creativity, problem solving, and things like that. Well, I started to notice some patterns in human behavior in my work as an executive coach and working with executive teams. And I would also propose that there's a hierarchical set of needs that all people have in the workplace to really not just survive at work, but also to thrive, both individually and to help their organizations succeed. And if we can tap into those human needs, we can really begin to create a place that people love, that they're committed to, and where they can succeed both individually and collectively. So that's what we're here to explore today. And the first four needs that are part of this model, connection, certainty, contributions, and clarity, these are what we call the core needs that people have. They're fundamental to every human's behavior or needs. And the top two needs are what we call the needs of fulfillment, challenge and growth, and community impact. And when we can really start tapping into these needs of fulfillment, we can really start impacting employee engagement and productivity. So let's talk about the first foundational need of connection. This is a picture of my family, my wife, Rachel, my 8-year-old Eli, and my 5-year-old Max. And this was just from a couple of weeks ago. We were up in Keystone, Colorado on a ski vacation. And the little guy on the right is Max. And we were talking this past week, and I told him that my latest book was releasing, and Max said, "Oh, Daddy, I didn't know you wrote books." And so I opened the book up, and we did something a little bit different with this book, and that I hired an illustrator an animator to create some visuals throughout the book. And one of the visuals that I showed to Max was this picture. And I said, "Max, what do you see in this picture?" And he kind of looked at it and stared at it for a little while. And he said, "Well, these people over here, they don't know what this guy is thinking." I said, "Yeah, you're right, Max. They don't know what he's thinking." And then I showed him this picture, which is on the next page. And I said to Max, what do you see in this picture? And he took a moment to think about it. And he said, "Well, the people are talking to each other." And Max is exactly right. That's what the basic level of connection is about. It's really about the need to belong, and it's about the need to feel loved. And when people do that, they start talking to and with each other. And it's not a lot more complicated than that. And that might sound soft in a corporate workplace, but I think it's anything but soft. When people aren't connected, they don't speak. They don't share their thoughts. They, like Max, they don't talk to each other, which then gets in the way of creativity and innovation and everything else that happens when human beings have conversations together. And when we built this model, we played around early on whether connection should be at the base or certainty should be at the base. Certainty is really about physical and psychological safety. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as we did some research around this idea of connection and certainty, what we found with connection is that in longitudinal studies, what we found is that the quality of people's social connection is the primary indicator or the primary predictor of long-term physical and mental health and happiness. And that was it. When we saw that research done by Harvard, we just said, this has to be at the base. And so like my son, Max, and his ideas around, when people talk, they come from a place of positive intent and they speak up when speaking up matters most. There's a reason why this question is one of the questions that Gallup asks in employee engagement surveys. Do you have a best friend at work? Isn't that interesting? It's actually a fairly controversial question too, but when we think about it, connection is so key that when we have friends at work, when we have connections at work, people are just more productive, they're more engaged, and they're much more likely to be committed to their organization. So instead of maybe doing this in a chat box, maybe we can just open it up quickly through a couple of thoughts here. How do you create connection in your work environment? What do you do either individually or how could you create more connection, would you say, especially in this virtual space that we've been working in? Feel free to come off mute and respond, or feel free to just share something in the chat box. And Johnny, to your chat, I think there was a TED Talk on that. Harvard, you're exactly right. There's also been a longitudinal study by Harvard on the same topic. And in the back of the book, we cite the source for where we found that information. So how do you create connection in your environment? What comes to mind for you? What are some things that you all do? Heidi.
Well, in the role I'm at right now, I was hired virtually. So it's been virtual at this place since the start. I actually had my first interview the day before COVID shut everything down. So
unbelievable.
What we do is really at the beginning of our meetings is check in with people. Just ask them, how's your day? What's going on? Rather than just jumping in, okay, we're going to get started. And here's what we're going to talk about. So making those connections. Our team, I'm part of HR, so we announce birthdays every day when we have them. And so we all reach out to anybody who's got a birthday and say, hey, hope you have a great day. Things like that, just those little personal things, even though it's over Zoom or email.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You're asking them about themselves.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're right. And it doesn't have to be complicated, but it's these little things that build connection. There's an executive team that we are working with, one of the healthiest executive teams I've ever met. And they do an exercise pretty frequently. They call it top 5%, bottom 5%. I talk about this in the book a little bit. And they each share the best stuff that's going on in their lives and the hardest stuff. And it's incredibly vulnerable exercise. So simple, but they do that on a regular basis. If not every week. And they have built a deep level of vulnerability-based trust and connection and a sense of belonging to each other, high level of commitment to each other. And it's through doing little things like that. Johnny, how about you? What are your thoughts? And I know you've probably seen a lot of this in your executive coaching and leadership development work as well.
Yeah. So it is an interesting environment because, when I was in the workforce, that was pre-COVID. So you were in the same environment. Now that I'm a part of 3 different boards and I just joined in this virtual world, I like the one-on-one conversations, and I had one today, and it's amazing how much that creates a better environment from a team perspective, right? If I'm on a board, we're working as a team to get things done. I have not met these individuals personally, but just through one-on-one conversations and phone calls that happen outside of the meetings, and we can move things. It's unbelievable how quickly we can make decisions and build that trust.
Yeah, for sure. That's just those one-on-one conversations can speed things up, and things get missed when we don't, like Max says, when we don't talk to each other, when we don't know what each of us are thinking. So connections is at the base of our model. As many of you know, I live in Boulder, Colorado. I had the good fortune of spending 17 years on volunteering on the mountain rescue team, Rocky Mountain Rescue, which is one of the oldest and most respected mountain rescue teams in the nation. And when someone gets stuck on the side of a cliff face in El Dorado Canyon, or gets lost, or has a paragliding accident, or injures themselves, RMRG is there, Rocky Mountain Rescue is there day or night. And there's a really interesting philosophy that Rocky Mountain Rescue has. On most mountain rescue teams, there's one person who serves as a safety officer when you're on scene on a mountain rescue. RMRG doesn't do that. Rocky Mountain Rescue doesn't do that. Instead, everyone on the scene plays the role of safety officer. So individuals, if you're working on one part of a technical system to evacuate a team member, they double check each other's work so that when you're building an anchor or you're lowering a patient and 2 or 3 litter bearers down the side of a rock face, they can ensure that everyone is safe from whatever's happening. So this concept of safety officer, where everyone is the safety officer, pretty radical idea, but it enables the team to operate both physically safe as well as mentally and emotionally safe. And when organizations, I think, have that foundational level of connection built, it enables us to have certainty. And in our model, certainty comes as a result of safety, meaning both physical safety as well as emotional or psychological safety. Now, before COVID, I would have told you, the realm of physical safety pertained to organizations that were involved in manufacturing or resources or maybe biotech. And with COVID, now I think every organization has a responsibility for physical safety. But on a team, the biggest lift comes from psychological safety. And the construct was first developed by Harvard organizational behavioral scientist Amy Edmondson. Many of you may have heard or seen some of her work. And she talks about team psychological safety, and that it's a shared belief by team members that the team is a safe place for interpersonal risk-taking. Things like asking for help or having a different opinion than what others might have. The ability to take some risk in front of and with and through conversation with peers without having the risk of being humiliated. And so it becomes absolutely critical in today's environment. Is our environment as a business, are our businesses getting more or less complex from your vantage point? What do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down, more complex, less complex? Nods, yeah, mostly more complex. And if we think about some of the challenges or maybe opportunities, depending on how you look at them, that we face now, who here has exited from a pandemic and figured out how to get back to the office in a meaningful way? We're all learning how to do that. Who here has figured out how we're going to leverage how the metaverse is changing our business models? Like, there's so many new and complex things that are happening. The understanding of the psychological safety becomes critically important, because the things that we're dealing with as leaders, where they used to fall into sort of this predictable realm where you knew the cause and effect ahead of time, and if you didn't, you knew where to find the resource or to find an expert to understand the current situation and then apply the playbook to the search situation, that's becoming less and less relevant. Many of the challenges that we face today are unpredictable. We don't know what the answer is until we try something. Well, you can't try things if you're not willing to experiment, if you're not willing to try and fail and then learn from it and then pivot your business model. And none of that can happen without creativity, innovation, new ideas coming out, challenging the status quo. And that all comes from creating a space of safety to allow for those conversations that need to happen most. What are some ways to create safety at work? What are some ways to create safety at work? What comes up for you? What stands out to you?
I would say really embracing mistakes as learning opportunities and not a threat.
Yeah, for sure. And giving people permission to embrace that. Yeah, I completely agree. So much of the tone that we set is important, or the values that we embrace, or the norms that we embrace. Giving people permission, or just listening, staying calm and helping people feel a sense of control. The creating a space of safety becomes more and more important if we really want to be able to innovate and address the unpredictability and the complexity in our workplace. This is not really a former client, but represents a former client who I had the good fortune to coach over about an 18-month, 2-year period. He was running a 1,200 person manufacturing facility, sort of your classic dominant personality style leader. So driven, motivated by change, motivated by authority, controlling his environment, highly action oriented, strong bias to action. And part of Steve's biggest challenge is that as he moved forward, he often left dead bodies in his wake. And you may know this kind of leader. They're often pulled into situations to turn things around because they take control, they take charge, and they move quickly. After working with Steve for about 18 months in a coaching session, tears came to his eyes. By the way, his name's not Steve, but just for the sake of our webinar today, it is. He worked long and extended hours for this business. He put everything else as a second priority, his family, his health, nothing came above his job. And the tears that showed up in that coaching session were because he wished that his C-suite executive that he reported into would give him just a little bit of a nugget and tell him that he was doing a good job. Now, this is the last thing that I would have expected from Steve. And for a year and a half, I never saw that. Steve was more of the kind of leader that said, you know what, I'm not sure why we should recognize people. That's what they get paid to do. And when I heard Steve seeking that just little bit of recognition from his manager, that's when it clicked that everybody has this need. Some people have it more than others, but at the end of the day, people want to know that they're valued and that their contributions actually matter. And this speaks to the third level in our model. Connection, certainty, contributions are valued. I think of all the 6 needs, this cuts most deeply to our sense of self-worth. And I think stories of management gone wrong or teams gone wrong, they almost always connect back to this human need. People want to know that they're valued. They want to know that they matter. They want to know that they have a voice. And it speaks to, in the book, I outline for each of these human needs, I outline some of the fears that are associated with each of these human needs. And I think that the fear that underlies this core need is linked to an evolutionary function where we tend to overlook the positive and we focus on the negative because our survival instincts assume that the consequence of overlooking a negative thought or action outweighs the consequences of overlooking the positive. And it can be really costly in the workplace. From your opinion, what's the impact when people don't feel valued at work? Again, feel free to jump in or feel free to just use the chat box. But when people don't feel valued at work, what's the impact to people, process, and the business?
They could leave. So you're
for sure.
down course.
Yeah, and we're seeing that certainly with this unprecedented level of attrition in our workplace today, right? Like employees' perspectives have changed, and their priorities have changed as a result. And if they are not working in a place where they feel valued, where they feel like their contributions matter, attrition is certainly one option that people are taking for sure. Colette, welcome. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you for the invitation. And I just wrapped up with a client, wanted to hop in and see what you all are up to. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, there are so many. I think this is, the $60 million question. I would say, an impact is withholding. There's this, people are not offering their best and they're not collaborating very effectively and they don't have access to their greatest resourcefulness.
So well said. Yeah, that guardedness or that withholding, it goes exactly against everything that we need from people today, right? As the complexity and unpredictability in our workplace continues to rise, we need people's ideas and thoughts and input. But if you don't feel like you matter or that you're valued, people will more likely take less risk. And so these things all build on each other for sure. It's a really great point. My father, as I mentioned earlier today, I'm here visiting my dad, and my dad's an incredible man. He taught us, me and my three brothers, all how to be solid human beings. And as coming from an Italian Catholic family background, meals were very important to us. And we sit in one meal and we talk about what we're going to have for dinner or what we're going to eat in the next meal. So meals have always been like a cornerstone for my family. And growing up, I very distinctly remember in many, many dinner time conversations, my father talking about the old man. And the old man was a term that my mother and father coined for my dad's boss. And it was a nightly routine, hearing about my dad's trials and tribulations that were derived from his experiences with the old man. And after he was laid off after 18 years of dedication to the old man and the company, there was a really big impact that reverberated through our family for a long, long time. And so I think this need cuts to the core. It cuts to the core of having an impact on people, not just in the boardroom, but all the way out to the kitchen table. And when people feel like their contributions matter, things don't just change at work, but things change around the kitchen table too. All right. So connection, certainty, contributions. The fourth core need is what we call clarity of both the what and the how. And this is really a balance of results and relationships, what we produce and how we go about doing it. And most organizations generally are pretty clear on the what, the results, the OKRs, the goals, the vision, the strategies. Many organizations aren't, but in general, we lean toward a propensity to be better at understanding what needs to get done versus how it needs to get done. The how is often unspoken. It's the behavioral norms and expectations that really can become more elusive for organizations. And then employees are left guessing. They're left guessing about how to act, what's rewarded, what's criticized, how to be. And so this is a really important component of creating an environment where people can thrive at work and ultimately understand how to succeed. And there's some fears that show up in our coaching sessions with people. We often get into conversations with leaders, senior and executive leaders, in our coaching where frustration comes out. The executive team is constantly changing priorities, or I don't know where we're going, what's our vision, or who has decision rights. This is incredibly frustrating. Or what's expected of me. Ultimately, the fear that underlines this need for clarity is a fear of not knowing how to succeed. Not knowing how to succeed. I remember being in a coaching session with a leader, and she was telling me about, bringing some ideas to the CEO that she was working for, and the CEO just in response said to her, and no, that's not it. And she asked for some input, and his response was, well, I'll know it when I see it. And I think that's one of the most frustrating experiences that people can have. When we don't know how to succeed, when we don't know what's expected of us from both a results and a relationship standpoint, or from a both what and a how perspective, it's very difficult to be successful in the workplace. So I'm curious for you, how much clarity do you have at work? And we've only got a few people on the polls in the call today, but let's launch this poll anyway. We'll just see what happens. I have two questions for you. Number one, how much clarity do you have related to what you need to do to be successful? So these are the results that you need to create. Are you crystal clear, mostly clear? It's vague, or I'm unclear on how to be successful. And then question number two, how much clarity at work do you have about how you need to be successful? The culture, the values, the behavioral norms, the expectations about what is rewarded and criticized in your workplace. Take a moment to answer these two questions, the what and the how. How clear are you on the what? How clear are you on the how? What comes up for you in your organization? All right, just another 10 seconds or so. All right, so let's end the poll and look at the results. I'm not sure, with 4 people, the results are going to show a lot, but we've got 3 people that are crystal clear on the what, really interesting. And 3 people that are sort of mostly clear on the how. That's pretty good. And knowing many of you who are on this call today, it doesn't surprise me that you have clarity maybe in both areas. Any reactions to our very small sample of data here? Lindsay?
No, my reaction is actually, I'm thinking about my husband. So Sal, you know my leadership crew, and they're very direct and very open and transparent, and we've established those relationships. So, and the mostly clear for me on the how is just because sometimes we got to figure out, what our best path is to be successful, and do the check and inspect with our mentors and superiors and managers and things to get it right. But that's part of the learning and the discovery. So I kind of like being in that mostly clear part personally. I get to grow as well with that. So, but I'm thinking about my husband with this. My first reaction was, I think for him, the answer to that first top question, and he's in a new role, sales position, director, new team, new boss, the whole thing. It's really vague, if not unclear for him. And I'm thinking about all the things that you're thinking about. He doesn't have safety. Unfortunately, his direct supervisor isn't a people person. It's very upside down, and it's almost to the games part, or they're running on playing the politics instead of actually getting to the nitty gritty and saying, and this is what success looks like for right now. And it kind of bums me out.
Yeah, and if you don't, it's interesting because you're making a connection between that need for safety and the need for clarity. If you don't have the safety, it's really hard to then engage in that discussion that might involve some dialogue or debate or bouncing ideas off of each other. That without that safety, it's very hard to get the clarity that you need to be successful. Yeah, nice connection. Colette, anything to add? I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, it's easy for me to say I'm clear about what I need to do because I'm a solopreneur and I get to decide all that stuff, right? But I'm thinking about my clients, and this notion about clarity is something that actually comes up a lot. That's not the way it's served up, but symptoms show up, but the root cause is an absence of clarity or a lack of understanding. And good.
So you were talking about your clients, Colette.
Yeah. And so I think where I might've gotten chopped off for you was this notion about feedback and being willing to offer clear feedback in service to somebody else's greatness and not withholding it because you're afraid it's going to be, because then it sets up this kind of void of clarity and resentment on both sides. And I don't know, it's like a spiral. So anyway, clarity is kind and super important.
Yes. Yeah, that's, I think, well said. And again, you're, part of, I think the connection you're making here is you can't have clarity if you can't have a space where you can provide feedback, and to have feedback, you need a place of safety. So in many ways, these needs are really connected. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So those 4 basic needs, we call the 4 core needs. We have 2 additional needs, which are really what we call the needs of fulfillment. And again, when we can start hitting on these top 2 needs, this is when we can really build some momentum in our organization. And I think more and more, this is what people are looking for at work. And so the 5th need is the need for challenge and growth. And look, I think as human beings, if we're not evolving, if we're not growing, we're stagnating. And I'm not sure there's anything in between. And people ultimately, I think when they're making progress, they feel good about themselves. They feel good about their situation. And as leaders, we have to find ways in which, one, we can grow ourselves, we can learn ourselves, but also create an environment where other people can evolve and grow. So nothing really complicated here. I think in the book, I talk about some fears associated with this dimension of the model, and where the fear around clarity was about how do I succeed today, I think the fear around challenge and growth is about how do I succeed in the future? If I'm not growing now, what is going to happen to me in the future? And I think COVID is, as I mentioned earlier, it's really accelerated some of the trends that we were seeing beforehand. And one of the trends is that their perspectives have changed and now their priorities are changing. And if we're not creating environments where people can be challenged and they can grow, people will find other places to find those growth opportunities. And it leads me to the sixth element of the model, which is, we call it community impact. And this is really the highest level of the model, if you will, or the highest level need. So, and because I think, and I think research backs this, when people find work that has an impact and has a meaning behind the widget they're making, or even themselves, whether it's to their team or to the business or to the community or to our society as a whole, they find much more meaning and purpose in what they're doing. There's some interesting research from Cohen Communication. 74% of people say that their job is more fulfilling when they receive opportunities to make a positive impact at work. And I think many of our younger generations in the workplace are forcing at least conversations around this topic. People want to do work that is meaningful and has a bigger impact on our society and in our world. And in the book, I just very briefly talk about a few different organizations that are doing that. Some of you, most of us know Salesforce. They donate 1% of their profits, products, and people's time. Pretty impressive. It's a pretty people-oriented culture. And there's a couple other examples. But I think the story that I would share is, in many cases, employees don't necessarily care, or organizations aren't necessarily taking a stand for doing something bigger in our work. And I remember doing some work with a leader, and she was head of an investment firm. And as she thought about her company's culture, she was really disappointed in the fact that the organization was solely focused on the financial aspect of work and sort of the financial stakeholders, if you will. And in a coaching session one day, she said to me, when I'm done here and when I retire, I want to go and be a professor. And I said, well, what is it that you love about being a professor? What is it that you want to do that comes from being a professor? And her energy started to raise as she was telling me about just being able to impact people's lives and their thinking and shape how they see the world. And I said, well, why don't you just do that right now in your role? Because you have a platform to do that. And so even if the organization that you work for isn't taking a stand for something bigger, we can use the platforms that we have today to make a bigger impact in our world. One person, one team at a time. So as you think about these needs, what I would invite you to do or to think about is what are the two needs that are most important to you? We talked about connection with people, that sense of belonging and love, if you will, for each other. Certainty as a result of safety, finding that psychological safety, that physical safety at work so you can take that interpersonal risk. Contributions are valued, really knowing that what you say, what you do, your voice matters, you're being heard, having clarity of the what and how so you know how to succeed. being able to evolve and grow, and then ultimately make a bigger impact. As you think about those 6 needs, my invitation is for you to think about, what are the needs that are most important to me? And then to think about the people around you, whether it's your direct reports or your manager or your peers. What are their needs? And ultimately, a conversation about this is where the best results will happen. But then to say, okay, if let's say certainty and challenge are my top 2 needs, what do I need more of from others and from work to get those needs met? What does my manager need from me in order for me to help her meet her needs? Or what do your people need more of individually and collectively, more or less from you? And in the resources landing page that we provided, there's a stakeholder assessment, if you will, that helps you sort of think about it and map out your needs and other people's needs so that you can intentionally adapt how you're showing up with other people on your team. So I'll leave you with this as we start to wrap up today. My mom lived her life surrounded by family and friends, and she made an incredible positive differences in so many people's lives, some big, some small. And she showed her love for people through her cooking, a warm meal, or sometimes it was a bed that she provided for people. And she may not have gotten to do everything that she wanted to do in her life, but she had an impact and she lived with purpose. And that's ultimately what matters. Steve Jobs once said, your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. And I think the opportunity is now, right in front of us, to make a positive and significant difference in this world. One person, one team, one workplace at a time. So thanks everyone for joining me today. There's a few resources again out on that landing page. And I think the URL is on page 116 of the book. But it's 512solutions.com/human workplace book. There's a video and a personal foundations toolkit to think about your needs and your stakeholders' needs. There is a toolkit on employing some of the human workplace needs strategies into change or change management that might be happening in your organization. And there's a team and culture assessment that you can use to assess your team. So thank you everyone for joining me today. Thanks for picking up a copy of the Deeply Human Workplace and for making our book launch so successful. We were so fortunate. We hit #1 in a number of different categories this week. Thank you, Colette, on Amazon, including workplace behavior, organizational behavior, business teams, and a few other categories. So thank you for your support. Please reach out if there's anything I can do to support you, and hope you have a great weekend.